John Madden, your new film, Miss Sloane, stars Jessica Chastain as a lobbyist taking on the gun lobby in America. What attracted you to this material?
Well, subject matter chiefly in the first instance. I'm a kind of a junkie for the American political process. Anybody who stands outside American politics is, I would say, baffled by by this very intransigent issue of legislation surrounding guns and so forth. And bafflement, and therefore the curiosity that arises from bafflement, is a very motivating factor in making a movie. But that's, I suppose, just the first base. The script is a pretty unusual beast. It's many things at once, which is the best kind of film to make, really. And at its core, it's just a very, very, very compelling study of an extraordinary character who just happens, but crucially, to be a woman, and a woman, notable for the extraordinariness of her power and effectiveness within an otherwise, famously male enclave.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a film that works on several different levels. I mean, it has a political point of view, and it's about an important issue. It's an interesting character study, like you said, and it's also a really entertaining kind of legal thriller.
Yes.
So can you talk about juggling all those different elements?
I will. I mean, it's true to say, I think when people hear about the movie, they imagine it's going to be a political drama, which possibly is a category that makes the eyes glaze over slightly, as if it's going to be an earnest and difficult experience that is going to require patience and concentration and all of those things that we like to think we leave behind when we go to the movies. It's actually an incredibly compelling story, and I think it's fair to say its natural cinematic habitat is thriller, really. It's a political thriller, which is a uniquely cinematic form. And because of the world it's dealing with, it's about a political strategist who gets extraordinary results by doing things unexpectedly. The natural heartbeat and pulse of the film is surprise. It's constantly outflanking you, and it keeps developing in ways that you're not quite expecting, which is a way of ensuring a very, very tensile engagement between the film and the audience. So, my major obligation was to tell that story as compellingly as I could. Secondarily, I wanted it to be a cinematic experience as opposed to an experience that you could equally well enjoy on a screen about this size. Not there's anything wrong with that, I hasten to add, but I think finding the specific gravity of a film story is quite a task these days. You were very familiar with ones that are stretched too thin and don't belong in that time frame, or compressed too tight and belong in a longer time frame, and one that just has the right weight for an experience. And when it's right, when that is right in the movies, it's a very, very satisfying thing. I mean, look, the way to balance it all is to go to the core thing that the film is dealing with, and that's actually about human behavior. In the end, that's the thing that seems to be the kind of core issue in pretty much every film I've made, even though they've ranged over a variety of genres and subjects. And Johnny Pereira and I, the writer, and I, in working on the film together for 6 or 9 months before we landed it and went out to market with it, we're really dealing with that issue. This is a character who, to begin with, is forbiddingly sort of conducting a professional existence, which doesn't seem to have much else going on besides that and the drive to succeed in whatever she's doing. And the film, to some extent, describes how she discovers what of herself she's left behind and so forth. That's a sort of counter melody to the main subject of the film, but it's the one that keeps you honest and keeps you true while you're making it. I think, to me, at a narrative level, it's about staying ahead of the audience and staying. I don't mean tricking them. I just mean letting the movie proceed at a pace which assumes you will keep up with it, which for the first 10 or 15 minutes people might have trouble doing, but eventually you settle down. It's like watching a Shakespeare play. You don't know what they're talking about for the first 10 minutes, and suddenly you hear it and you tune in. And I think this film has something of that. But I love films that are mixed in tone, thank you. And I love films that are doing several things at once. And I think this film does actually tick all of those boxes. And I think your emotions are pulled in many different directions. You're presented with a character who is profoundly flawed, but nevertheless is so compelling that you become engaged with her almost from the first frame, I think.
Absolutely, and I think it helps that you have this incredible performance by Jessica Chastain at the center. What made her right for the part? You'd worked together in the past on The Debt. What made her right for this part?
Well, she has the chops to, take on it at a very simple level. It needs an actor of quite staggering skills, I think. I mean, aside from anything else, just the sheer ability to get your mouth around those words at that speed and at that density, it is a sort of particular skill that you've got to be able to master to play this part. But actually, that's a cheap way of putting it. I really, it's because Jessica has an unusual ability to hold both poles of a character in perfect balance with one another. This is a sort of fearless creature she's playing, of really, really kind of feral intensity about the way she pursues things. She takes no prisoners. She says exactly what she wants to say and feels at any given moment, and has a sort of ferocity about her that's breathtaking. At the same time, this is one of the interesting things about the film, she's a woman in free fall to an extent. You could almost describe the whole movie as a kind of kamikaze act, because she doesn't have any life left underneath all of that. A more familiar story, if you switched the genders and made that role a man, that maverick outsider figure is a sort of stalwart of American movies, but never as a woman. And so Jessica, is an incredibly intelligent person, but she has a fragility about her that allows her to inhabit the underneath of all of that before she puts on the armor that becomes the character that you see in the film. And part of the journey of the film is the removal of that armor, so you find the person underneath. But mainly we worked together before and had a marvelous time. I had massive respect for her. She was not an established actress at all at that moment. She was an unknown when I cast her in that film. And we just decided we'd try and find something to do again together. And we've been exchanging material since that time. And this is the one that, just felt like a slam dunk, or a hole in one, as we say in England.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that this is the kind of part that would typically be played by a man. And throughout a lot of your works, Mrs. Brown, Shakespeare in Love, Proof, you've gravitated towards stories with strong women at the center. What attracts you to those kinds of stories?
Well, sort of complex women and women who are breaking the mold in some way. I would love to be able to say, yes, this is a passionate belief of mine, and I always seek out material that does this. It's not really true. I mean, it is certainly true that my admiration for women in general and the female sensibility is second to none. I think I was saying earlier that when I heard Obama the other day say, my wife is not just my equal, she's my superior, it rang obviously true when he said it, but it rings true for me all the time. And I believe they are a superior race and a more interesting race than the male race are often allowed to be. And so I'm drawn to that for sure. It just so happens that I've made a lot of movies where there are, and I've made a lot of, where those characters are at the center of it. I've therefore got to work with a lot of actresses, of whom that is also true. And I seem to have an affinity for those kind of actresses, and I like to work with them. And we seem to be able to make a connection. So I guess it's not an accident, but it's not something I specifically seek out. Though in this case, I have to say, the portrait of a woman in this film seems so unusual to me and politically provocative and interesting, and it's proved only to be 20 times more so for the current environment in which the film will be seen.
Well, you also tend to gravitate towards films that feature strong acting ensembles.
Yeah.
Talk about working with actors.
My background is theatre originally, so it's no secret that they are a race I also admire. And there's something about, I don't know, there's a sort of level of bravery, I think, involved in submitting yourself, all of yourself, your humanity and who you are and what you look like, to scrutiny in a virtual environment that I still find, a source of admiration. That's a sort of high-flown way of putting it. I like working with actors, and I find the observation of character on screen very, very compelling and profound. And actually, even in Miss Sloane, which is a movie that moves like a bat out of hell, it's those still silent moments that take on a kind of added power, precisely because they are interstitial, because they're a punctuation in a movie that doesn't stop. And there's some of the things that I think are just gestural moments that have to do with behavior and observation. So I also like the business of choreographing a group of people, and I suppose figuring out how to just literally block a shot, as we say in the business, which means put people in the right place and figure out how the camera's going to deal with them and interlace with them, is something that I enjoy, and I've inherited that from theatre, I suppose, a sense of how to do that. But it's pulling everybody into a hierarchy in terms of the storytelling. It is definitely something I concentrate on a great deal. So I like stories that spread your attention between a group of different people. And the way I would put it with this film is that everybody at one point or another, because it's a very well-written script and a well-considered script, carries the film at some point or another, despite the fact that it's called Miss Sloane, and it is not Mrs. Brown, Miss Sloane, and it's about that character. So apparently, exclusively, it's actually an ensemble movie, and everybody holds the movie and the importance of the movie in their hands at a given point, and that's kind of cool to work with.
Absolutely. So lastly, I wanted to ask you, one of your films, Shakespeare in Love, won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and you were nominated for directing. What did that recognition mean to you? And take us back to that night, because it was such a neck-and-neck race between you and Saving Private Ryan. I think there was a lot of suspense leading up. No one knew what name was going to be called when the envelope was opened. No, and we least of all expected it to be ours, to be completely honest. I mean, it was a whirlwind, that experience, because the film came out very late in the year and sort of suddenly burst upon the scene and achieved that rare thing of being a movie that was popular with an audience and just played incredibly strongly, but also was critically welcomed. And sometimes those things don't go together. In this case, it did. And, I was pretty new to the party in terms of that kind of experience. I'd never done the award circuit before.
even though the previous film I made was in contention in a few areas, but this was altogether. When it came down to it in the end, it's always sort of baffling to me because these films end up in competition with one another that don't really have a great deal in common, other than the fact that they involve celluloid and actors, as it used to be then. But I have to say, in the room, when that night unfolded, that was a pretty interesting process, because we did start to knock a lot of skittles down. Obviously, I knew Steven Spielberg was going to win Best Director. I never even imagined I would be in that zone anyway, even though I was very pleased with the film. But that film had some movie history in it. This first 40 minutes were, pretty stunning stuff. So that was fine, and I was never expecting that. But because of that, because in those days those two awards tended to go together, it was obviously a massive surprise both to us and to Harrison Ford, apparently, when he opened the envelope. There was a seemingly endless pause before he announced the name of our film. It's a one-off experience. That it's honestly I won't pretend that wasn't immensely exciting, but as time recedes, it's the film itself, I suppose, and the way audiences received it is what really lasts. But of course, it makes a big difference in the industry. People look at you in a different way, and it becomes a sort of passport, strangely, an international passport, because it turns out most people have seen that movie.
Absolutely. Well, John Madden, thank you so much, and congratulations on your new film. It's terrific. Thank you for the time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.